Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Here's what we're going to do today. I'm glad you're here, by the way. First of all, the whole purpose of all of this that we're doing is to try to improve education by redefining the role of the teacher. What is it that we're really supposed to do? How can we do that best to serve students so that we have, well, better academic outcomes and better personal outcomes for our students than what it is that we've been having recently? And let's kind of try to fix this trend. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the trends in education in this episode where we talk about grades. This is our fourth foundational element of quality teaching. And we're going to be talking about defining grades, grade articulation, what grades should mean, how to set that up, how to teach everybody about what your grades really mean and how, which is what is most important, how that positively impacts students and student performance. So let's get into it, right? Now, in the previous section, we talked about setting a whole class goal, right? And we talked about how that can kind of transform the culture of your classroom, make it more academically minded, and draw everybody in, get everybody working together and pulling in the same direction. But in order for that goal to really work, we have to have a good measuring stick. And that's what the grades should be. Okay. In the abstract sense, the grades really should be the validation of accomplishing the goal and serving the purpose of the class. They shouldn't be the goal of the class. Grades should not be the goal of the class. It shouldn't be the focus of the class. It's kind of like in a basketball game. You know, the objective is to win, and to win, you have to score more points than the opposition. But what a lot of teams end up doing is they end up focusing on scoring points instead of worrying about scoring more points than the other team, which means there's all kinds of ways you can limit the way the other team can score, all those kinds of things. And so the old adage is defense wins games. Defense wins championships. Same thing here. If we're focusing on the right things and the grades are measuring those right things, we're going to have the desirable outcomes. Right. Now, this is a tough one because, man, how many times, if you're an experienced teacher, how many times have you had a fight with an administrator, a counselor, a parent, teachers, even students, other teachers, all those things? How many times have you had fights with other people about grades? You know, people say, hey, your failure rate's too high, or someone else's failure rate is indicating that nobody actually learns anything in that class. Everybody passes with an A. You know, students and their parents, and sometimes even all the other people involved, they fret over GPA and class ranking, thinking that that's what's going to make them successful. They think getting into college is tough. I mean, come on, get over that. ASU has, what do they have, like over 90,000 students. Nobody's getting rejected there, right? And they're not the only one. There's you want to go to school, you can get into school, right? Grades are not going to be a gatekeeper for you. Your GPA is not going to be a great gatekeeper for you. Now, it might prevent you from getting the kind of scholarships you want, but if your GPA is phony, if it's false, if it's not well deserved, you're going to lose that scholarship anyway. And I've seen that happen all too often. Okay, so let's talk about how to set grades up. And one of the benefits of setting your grades up and having them well defined and articulated is that the arguments over grades, some of those fights, they go away almost instantaneously, because you can say, this is what the class is supposed to teach. This is how the grades measure that. And this is what an A, B, C, D, and F mean in this context. Ends the discussion, because either the student is fulfilling those things which are defined as the purposes of the class by the school, or they're not. So we're going to talk about how to kind of set that up. And that's kind of actually just the superficial part. There's some deep, meaningful things and changes that occur for students in the way that they engage when they better understand what grades are and what they mean. Okay? So, for about a decade, I'm going to share with you where I learned this first portion of the grades, because I think it's really important, and took a lot of courage from the leadership of this organization, but it really paid off. So the organization was Cochise Community College. I worked for them for about a decade. They're a little county in southeastern Arizona. You probably never heard of Cochise Community College unless you're from southern Arizona, but you should have, because a few years ago they were ranked as the second most academically successful community college in the United States. So based on academic success, second in the nation. So that's pretty outstanding, right? So one year during the convocation, which is like where the whole entire staff gets together. They have one staff meeting a year. That's it. So everybody gets together. The head honcho, I think they call him the chancellor there. Anyway, it'd be like the superintendent of your school, whatever he's called. He gets up there and he says, the biggest issue in education today is grade inflation. I was stunned. Somebody leading a school is talking about grade inflation. I mean, my experience had been the opposite of that. They want to engineer a system so that students are almost guaranteed to pass no matter what, regardless of merit, effort, or development or anything, right? So, grade inflation. So, he said that this is the problem, and it's got severe consequences. And I'll share with you, I'll put some links in the description. And if you're watching this in the video, I'll put a couple graphs up for you right here. Grade inflation is increasing. It's been charted for quite a long period of time. It's been going up, and ironically, public confidence in schools, is the mirror of that. It's flipped around. So as grade inflation goes up, everybody knows it's nonsense. Roughly speaking, that's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, everybody, but public confidence has been on the decline. And that decline matches the increase in grade inflation. Now, grade inflation is when you have an overabundance of A's and B's in a class, undeserved. So it does a lot of damage to students in lots of ways. I'll share some. I found some interesting articles on this topic that I'll share the links for you if you can find them on our blog. I'll put them in the description below. You can check those out, explore those things a little bit more in detail if you like. But here's what the chancellor ended up saying. He said, "Look, an A is exceptional. Not everybody's going to get an A. The normal grade is a C. If your class is set up correctly, we would expect most people to get a C. Now, maybe you have an exceptional cohort. Maybe they work really well together, and then, you're going to have an abundance of A's. But usually, if somebody's getting a high A all the way through, they probably didn't really need to take that class. They got it. And so here's what he did. He shared this screen with us, and he defined letter grades as follows. He said, look, an A means complete and total mastery. A student that got an A, they know the material well enough they could have taught it. So they know it every which way from Sunday. They know it inside and out. Any mistakes they make are just going to be the kind of random mistakes that people can make on anything at any time. It doesn't matter how expert you are, but certainly nothing fundamental, and those mistakes are very limited, and there's a lot of self-awareness with those kinds of mistakes. And so an A is demonstration of mastery. A B is fluency. Now, if you think about fluency in the context of speaking a foreign language, somebody that's fluent struggles a little bit. They miss some words. They misuse words. They have to pause and think quite a bit to articulate a sentence, to understand some complex information. They have some gaps, and those gaps do cause a little bit of trouble, but they're really, really good. Right? That's fluency. And that's what a B would be. He said a C is proficiency. So if somebody is meeting the minimum standard for the class, that's a C. That's not a B. That's not an A. Minimum standard is a C. That means they got it, and they got it good enough. That's a C, according to this chancellor. And I subscribe to this. A D is somebody that's approaching. In college, D is not for credit. It is in high school. But a D in college is not credit. And the way he defined a D is somebody that's getting close, and less than that is, of course, an F. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is wrong with grade inflation. One of the things that happens with grade inflation is that it makes students believe that they're prepared for what's next, and they're not. And so what ends up happening is you get these kids that take these prerequisite classes, and if there's grade inflation occurring in those classes, the students think that what they're doing is good enough to earn that A that they want. They have a goal of a high grade, and through grade inflation, they extra credit, inappropriate quiz retakes, an over emphasis on giving class credit, a grade credit on practice instead of on performance. It makes those students believe that what they're doing is sufficient when it might not be, because they might not have the solid foundation that they believe they have that's required really to be an A student, right? And so when they move up and they move up and they move up, eventually, even if grade inflation exists in those higher level classes, eventually the gap between where they are and what it is they're expected to perform gets large enough that no amount of grade inflation is going to save them. And so it does set students up for failure in the long run. But it also does a couple other things for students and teachers that's, I believe, negative and counterproductive. So one of the things that grade inflation does is it provides a safety net for students that are either just straight out lazy or very insecure. And in both of those cases, those students have some development that needs to occur. And it's not going to be exposed if the situation is such that grade inflation is occurring. To address those kinds of things takes a little bit of a slap in the face. It makes us uncomfortable. That's going to motivate you to change. And so, it's it kind of keeps people insulated from reality, and they think everything's fine, and then they're not really motivated to change, because why change if they're getting the grade they want, right? It also has the same effect on an ineffective teacher. An ineffective teacher doesn't have to work hard to develop. They don't actually have to teach well. They don't have to have a good system in place if they're allowed to get away with passing everybody. Now, just to be clear, I do believe that all teachers are ineffective initially. I think a new teacher, I don't care how great that teacher is going to be, and I could be wrong, but teaching's so hard to do. There's so many things to learn. It's so nuanced that new teachers might be fairly effective, but generally speaking, they've got so much ground to cover to get to where they really can be that it takes a lot of work. And so just like that teacher, just like that student who's not going to develop in response to getting grades lower than what they want, a teacher is not going to develop if they're allowed to have those markers of success, because those grades are also a marker of success of the teacher. A teacher, if everything's right, if everything's set up and it's rigorous and it's appropriately measured, if a class has high grades under such a situation, the students were successful, the teacher was successful, the whole class was successful. But in such a situation, if the opposite happens, if you got lots of D's and F's, maybe a handful of C's, students weren't successful, teacher wasn't successful, the class wasn't successful. And that's meaningful information. It might hurt, it might suck. It definitely would suck to experience that. But it's required for growth. And one of the biggest things that's going to happen in education is students are going to develop, they're going to grow, they're going to improve. Teachers need to do the same. We're not born naturally good teachers. So I'll put some more I'll put some links or some articles that I read about, these topics, in the description. You can explore those and check those out too, if you like. So one of the questions you might have here is, well, how do you know if a student deserves one grade or another, right? And how do I know where's the delineation between a B and a C? If a C is proficient and a B is fluent, or, between fluency and mastery, where is that? Where's that line, right? And that's kind of hard to determine. It kind of depends on the class. But I think what is very important to understand is that if extra credit and test retakes, inappropriate test retakes, we'll talk about how you can have an appropriate test retake and how to give students opportunities to recover from bad performances. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if all of those things are taken into consideration to the point where that can influence a grade instead of the true performance, then the grades are invalid. They don't really do what they're supposed to do. A student should In order for the grade to be valid, the student must demonstrate their level of knowledge and proficiency and appropriate performance if that involves creative problem-solving skills or whatever is appropriate for that class. They have to perform under strict conditions so that you can actually, as the teacher, you can actually evaluate where they are, and that evaluation needs to be aligned with the course expectations. So in college, they give you, the teacher, a course expectation list, and that's all the things the students have to know from that class. And so, when the students have demonstrated all of those things at the appropriate level, that's how you're going to determine the grade. So, for example, in a foreign language class, the students got to demonstrate a level of competence with reading, writing, and listening. If they're allowed to just memorize things, they don't even have to understand them. And if you train them on what you're going to say and you translate it for them ahead of time, right? If a teacher coaches the student on the test that way, in that fashion, that's no good. Now that seems obviously flawed in a language class, but that same exact thing happens in other classes. The relative same thing. So it's kind of like, before a test, teachers will say, hey, here's what's on the test. This is what you got to do. That's the same as saying to a student that's going to be tested on their ability to listen to something in a foreign language and translate it into their own language. That's the same thing as telling them what you're going to be telling them in their own language, translating it ahead of time for them. That's invalid. That's no good. Do you see? All right. Now, let's move on a little bit here. So, the chancellor, he wasn't done. He also had some other pieces of information that were very, very challenging for everybody, myself included. And I don't know, it was a very valuable experience just listening to him and hearing what he had to say about his expectations, because one of the things he said is that in one way, teachers are less flexible than they need to be when it comes to grades and evaluation of student performance. And in other ways, they're entirely too flexible. And we've got it backwards. We've got to flip it. His argument was kind of like this. He said, if you're teaching a semester-long class and teachers and the student's responsible to learn, things X, Y, and Z. And early in the semester, when they do the assessment on thing X, you teach it to them, they practice it, go through all that, they take the assessment on thing X. If they didn't perform well, they didn't know it. But in learning thing Y, they've developed and they now understand thing X, and they can demonstrate it, then you need to take that into account. So the timeline doesn't really matter too much, provided that they satisfy all of the expectations of the course by the end of the course. So the final exam is tops. That's the most important thing. It's the key. The final exam is heavily weighted. It needs to be with great consideration. That is super, super important, because that's the chance for students to remedy any mistakes that they had made along the way. I had I think it was differential equations professor at the University of Arizona. And what he did, it was kind of interesting. I think he must have subscribed to this notion. In his class, there were 3 tests and a final exam. And the way this worked is if you passed all 3 tests, you didn't have to take the final at all. But you could, and you could actually improve. But if you say you failed the first test, but you did really well in the next 2, on the final exam, you could just take the first section. The final exam was sectioned to match the content from each of those 3 tests. Different questions, different framing of question, but same level of complexity, right? And so at the final, when the class is over, you had one last chance to demonstrate what it is you really knew. You also had a chance to demonstrate if you had improved in those things that maybe you only got like a B on a test and you wanted to get a B and A student, then on that final exam you had a second chance. And so that kind of spirit, that kind of idea is what the chancellor was talking about as well, is that the student grade should be a reflection of their proficiency and knowledge with the content of the class, demonstrated under, appropriate circumstances that allow you to actually evaluate that student at the end of the class. So have they demonstrated knowledge, during the class. Don't overly punish them for something that went wrong early on. We're talking about development. So if they developed and they got it by the end, the test needs to reflect that, or the grade needs to reflect that. So no grade inflation. They're not going to give them fluffy grades. You're not going to give them a grade they don't deserve. And the way they deserve a grade is by demonstrating that they've, been at either a mastery, fluency, or proficiency level on the course expectations in a rigorous way, in an appropriately rigorous way. So no fluff, no dumbing down tests, no giving retests of the same things, doing it correctly, right? And we'll talk more about that in just a second, right? Now, one of the things that I know I get a lot of pushback from lots of people in education and outside of education is it's unfair to have such weight and focus on outcomes of tests. And I do 100% agree that we are over tested. And I also agree that there's no sense in giving a nonsensical test, a test that doesn't really serve a purpose, that doesn't help the student to develop, it doesn't give the student feedback, it doesn't give the teacher feedback. That's a waste of time. Nobody should do those. We shouldn't be spending time and money on those things whatsoever. But having good, appropriate tests that inform the student of their success and maybe give them something to build on, and also allows the teacher insight into where the students are and provides feedback on their own program, those are invaluable. Those have to be there. The idea, though, is that, these poor kids, there's so much pressure on them. I mean, come on. I don't believe kids are fragile. Kids are tough, but they're developing, and it's hard to make some of those changes. And so, while yes, it's a test is a difficult thing to do, and it can make you nervous. But the thing is, that's their chance. That's their chance to show what they've got. A lot of people say, "Hey, look, we shouldn't be doing these high stakes tests at all." I'm not even talking about standardized tests. I'm talking about finals and things like that. We shouldn't be doing these tests at all because in real life, you don't have to take tests. Nonsense. That is absolutely demonstrably false. There's lots and lots of high stakes real life tests that people have to take. Some of them are uneducated, like, they don't have college degrees. So, for example, if you wanted to be a lineman working at a utility company, you serve an apprenticeship for 4 years. And during that 4-year time period, you're taking all of these little tests. And at the end, you take a big test. It's a one-shot deal. You fail, your career's over. Done. See you later. Good luck somewhere else. They don't play around. If you want to be a doctor, you have to take a test. You want to be a lawyer, you got to take the bar test. If you want to be a teacher, you still have to take tests. There are tests that you have to take in real life that are very important, even if there weren't. School and taking tests are high pressure, problem-solving situations. We're not born with the skills to perform like that. We have to develop it. And so if the challenge is approachable, but maybe a little beyond what the comfort zone is, that's absolutely perfect. That needs to exist. And an education system absent of such a thing is, in my humble opinion, going to be totally worthless. Totally worthless. Okay? So anyway, moving aside from that, the tests are important, I believe. I think I've stated my reasoning for that belief. So let's move on to how do you align your grades? How do you set a standard that you can communicate and educate everybody on that this is what an A is. This is how a student will demonstrate mastery or fluency for a B, proficiency for a C, right? How do you align all of those things? Now, if your class, if you're lucky enough to have an external measuring stick for your class, a quality one, like if you're an AP teacher or you teach IB, or like I do Cambridge IGCSE or Cambridge AS, anything like that, or some of those courses that you take a test to be certified to do a certain job. Those make your life a little easier because you can design your class in a way that this goes back to aligning your expectations with the purpose. If you've aligned your expectations, so the homework and the tests, to the purpose of the class, then everything they're doing is helping them prepare to to demonstrate their knowledge on that assessment or that test, whatever it may be. And so you can use that to kind of reverse engineer your grades. Let me explain. So let's take AP, for example. AP tests, 5, 4, 3, 2. I don't know. I think there's a 1. I don't know if there's a 0 actually, but anyway, those are the grades. Like a 5 is the highest score, and a B is a 4 is the second highest score. It might be appropriate to say, hey, look, the students that are demonstrating that their level of ability and proficiency is going to earn them an A on the AP test. A 5 on the AP test. Let me say that over again. Let me start over. The students that in class are demonstrating ability and proficiency at the level that will earn them a 5 on the AP test deserve an A in the class. Now, maybe a 5's too high. Maybe it's the people that are demonstrating that you would, the ability that you would predict would actually earn a 4. Maybe that's the A mark, and the 3's a B. I don't know. It's, that's entirely, hopefully it's entirely up to you, but you can make that kind of articulation, and then you've got something to build on. You got something that you can easily communicate. So yeah, that's how I would go about doing it. Now, one of the tricky things is this. What if you don't have that external measuring stick, right? What if you're just teaching, like here in Arizona, what if you're teaching, Algebra 1, for example, or, U.S. history? There's no external test. Now for Algebra 1 there is. For math and science we have, what's it called? The AZ Merit. But that test is trash. It's totally worthless. It's a waste of time and money because, it's like something like a 64 question test and they have like a 712 point scale. It's multiple choice too. So they're either right or wrong. It's voodoo. It's nonsense. So you get a grade back and either the students passed or failed. So you've got like some general result, but you've got nothing that you can tell the students, hey, this is what you did good on. This is what you really need to develop with. They give you these categories, but it's so vague. You don't see the questions. You don't see the complexity of the questions, the level of rigor. It's a terrible test. It doesn't provide any information to the teacher as to how they can improve, what it is they need to focus on, what they're doing well with. So that's no good, right? And a lot of classes don't even have that. So I would suggest that you get together with some of your colleagues and you write measuring sticks. You write these end of course exams for each other. You get together and you say, hey, look, I would like you to write a test for my class that I will give my class at the end of the year to determine how well they performed, how well they really did learn, the things that we've covered in this class. And at the end of the year, you give them that test and you can get the feedback you need. That would be a really good way to go about it, in absence of something external. And that would give you a way to say, hey, this is what it means to get an A. You're going to have to get this kind of score on this kind of test. And, that's really a needed thing. Now that's something that is beyond let me think of how to say this. Most of what I want to talk about in this podcast and all of these episodes is things that teachers can bring to the classroom to change. This external device, having a really high quality one, is a little beyond the reach and influence of a teacher. So writing tests for each other is better than nothing. But what we really need are tests like AP, the IB, the IGCSE, some of those certification tests, because that is a very true, valid assessment of the performance of the students and the teacher and the class as a whole. And you can use that to articulate your grades. So in absence of that, you got to do your best. It can still work. You can still say, hey, look, here's how I define mastery for the content of this class, and this is what I expect students to do. So let's wrap it up. Right now, I'd like you to imagine this. Imagine that a student walks up to you and says, hey, why did I have an A? Sorry, that was kind of a disparaging imitation, right? The student comes up to you and says, hey, why don't I have an A? You could respond, well, what does it mean to have an A? Now imagine that student said, well, to have an A means that I've demonstrated the highest proficiency at the highest level on an appropriate assessment. I hope that the discussion we've had here today has motivated you to put things in place so that such a conversation could occur. because it can and it will. It has for me, and I know it has for some other teachers that have their grades properly articulated, and they've taught their students the meaning of these grades. They've also explained it to, the parents, the administrators, and the counselors. And it's very valid, and it really does help students to better understand what it is they're doing, where their efforts really need to be, what the focus of their efforts needs to be, where it needs to be, and what it means to perform well, and how a grade really should reflect all of that. It is an absolute ton of work, and probably is going to require annual revision for, maybe for, eternity. Just slight little tweaks and little changes here and there, but it is well worth it. It will make your life easier as a teacher. It'll limit some of those fights, but more importantly, it will make you a more effective teacher. It will help your students to better perform. It will also help them understand the meaning of everything they're doing in school, and they're going to be well informed of how their current behavior is paying off or not, and they can adjust those things. And if that isn't what a student's going to use in real life, if that's not what is going to translate outside of the classroom, then I don't know what it is. So, as always, look, I want to hear from you. I'm really working. I think now's the time for some major changes to occur in education. We've needed them for a long time, but the time wasn't right. The time's right now because of all the school closures and everything like that. It's wide open. Everybody knows there's major problems, and now's the time to fix it. Now's the time we can start doing some things, and we can start at the level of the teacher. I don't have the playbook. Maybe somebody else does. Maybe I've got some ideas that are going to help you. Maybe they challenge you and you decide, I'm going to keep doing the things the same way because I believe that's what's best. Maybe somebody else is better equipped to take on this calling. So I'm going to ask you to communicate with me. If you disagree, I want to know. If you agree, I want to know. If I caused you to, I don't know, if something I said resonated with you or I caused you to reflect, I want to know. If you know of somebody who might be interested in participating or would like to be involved with these discussions or would be interested in taking on something like this on their own, I want you to share it with them because it's really important. I think, our society is going to benefit. It's going to be impacted by changes in education for the good or for the bad. And I'd like to see it happen for the good. So that's why I'm putting all this together. That's why I'm asking you to help me out. Let me know how you're doing. Share it with other people. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for participating. Like, subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of stuff, please. I think it will really help get the word out there. I think this is a really important project. And I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope to see you soon. Hope you're safe. Be well. Talk to you later.